Hi, I'm Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. It's deja vu all over again. Maybe we're getting a lump of coal for Christmas or maybe a fruit cake because things are not looking too good on the coronavirus front going in to the Christmas season. And here to talk about some of that is Austin Jenkins. Thanks for joining us today, Austin.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
So, Austin, it seemed like it was just a few weeks ago that we were talking about this additional closure that happened in November. It was set to expire on December 14th for bars and restaurants and other businesses, but now it's been extended into the new year. What does the governor say about why this additional closure was necessary?
Yeah, it's an additional 3 weeks, takes us through the beginning of the new year. And what he said is two things. One is he wanted to give restaurant owners, for example, some certainty about what to expect through the holidays. Now, they're not happy about this news, but he wanted to let them know sooner rather than later that he was not going to allow a resumption of indoor dining. And then he also said it's because the disease behavior is still alarmingly high, that there are 1,000 people now hospitalized with COVID, that ICU beds in the state are at 80% of capacity. Now, of course, not all of those ICU patients are COVID patients, but we're still at 80% of capacity for those beds. And so generally, his message was things are unstable enough that from his perspective and the perspective of the public health officials who are advising him, it makes sense to extend this for another 3 weeks.
It seems like each time this has happened, going back to the spring of 2020 in March and April when we were first going through this, there might have been more public support or more people going, okay, we understand why this is necessary. It's going to hurt, but we understand. And each time there's been extensions and more measures put in place, mask mandates, things like that. There's the potential for some of those constituencies, if you will, to start to peel away. So have you seen any evidence from like business associations, restaurant groups, even Democrats and Republicans and allies in the legislature who might be starting to weaken their stances on some of the public support for these measures?
Yeah, it's a good question and a good point. There have been protests over the governor's orders going back to this spring. I distinctly recall covering a big protest rally here at the Capitol back in May. That was during the stay-home order, and the governor has noted that we're not back to that. He's trying to, he says, be more targeted and not do a blanket order like that. On the other hand, you can clearly hear the frustration on the part of Republican lawmakers who feel like there's not enough nuance here. And then you're seeing some kind of outright defiance of these orders. There's a restaurant down in Lewis County, south of where I am, that has been reopened. There have been protesters and supporters of this restaurant owner in the parking lot, some armed, almost daring the labor and industries inspectors to come try to shut the place down. So, is there more dissension? Is there less compliance than there was last spring? Hard to tell, but certainly there is fatigue and there is pushback.
Indeed, there is. And I'll also note some of those same restaurants staying open and L&I agents being sort of chased off and in some ways harassed at their own homes has happened in the Tri-Cities as well. We've seen and heard about some of that reporting. On another front, of course, coronavirus occupied almost all facets of life earlier in this year and throughout the spring and parts of the summer, just in terms of its news coverage. There was always an angle, the coronavirus effect on X or Y. And it seemed that sort of went away a little bit throughout the late summer and into the election season, of course, where the focus became a little bit more, including from us in the news media. And now it's back. Coronavirus seems to be everywhere in terms of not just news coverage, but in terms of how our daily lives might be impacted in some ways. And I want to ask you about some of the reporting you recently did about a state report about the child welfare system. How is coronavirus affecting child welfare in the state?
Yeah, there's really no sector of state government, no sector of the human services world that has been not touched by this pandemic. What this annual report from the State Families and Children Ombuds says is two things happened. One is after kids started learning remotely, learning at home, and weren't physically in school, the number of calls of reports of possible abuse or neglect to CPS, Child Protective Services, plummeted dramatically. I think it was down 42% in March or after that stay-home closure was imposed and schools stopped being in person. The other thing that the report found is that there has been a huge acceleration or increase in the number of nights that foster youth are spending in hotels or even in Department of Children, Youth, and Family offices because there's no foster home, no therapeutic bed for them. This has been an ongoing issue, but it seems to have been exacerbated by the pandemic because what the ombuds is hearing is many foster homes were less willing or perhaps unwilling to take kids in because of concerns about the virus. So that just added pressure to a system that is already overtaxed. And this is a discrete number of youth who are spending the nights in the hotels. They tend to have mental health issues, behavior issues that make them very hard to place. And there frankly just aren't enough options or beds for them in this state at this time.
So going into the 2021 legislative session, it was, of course, going to be a long one anyway. Like you mentioned, it's a 2-year state budget planning session. And I wonder, though, what sort of topics might be left off the agenda. Every year, of course, there's an idea that, well, we didn't get this bill over the finish line this year, and there's always next year. But next year is here. And of course, there's a lot of different priorities as it comes to the state budget in terms of COVID planning and things like that. What are some of the things that might not be heard this year that people were hoping that they would?
Well, let me give you an example of something they're going to try for again, and we shall see, and that is the low carbon fuel standard, or also it's been called by advocates the clean fuel standard. This is something that the governor has prioritized. It's certainly related to global climate change, not to COVID, but their team, Democrats, majority of Democrats are teeing this one up again. It didn't pass last year. So that's in the column of gonna try again. I asked the Speaker of the House about, for instance, education, which is half the budget, and there's so many pieces and issues to that. And Speaker Jenkins said, look, that we will have a narrower K-12 agenda this year because of COVID. There will clearly be conversations around and likely legislation around education, especially as it relates to COVID, but a broader conversation may not happen because of the current conditions. And then the other thing I'll note is that House Democrats, the House has 98 members. The majority Democrats with 56, 57 members told their members, limit yourself to 7 bills and don't try to introduce and push bills that are not teed up, ready to go, have a lot of support. If they're controversial, if they can wait a year and they're not urgently needed, the message to the House Democrats from their leadership was, wait a year. This is not the year to do it.
Well, it's good information, and we'll be looking forward to see what does come through the legislature. But beforehand, we hope that you get a little rest during this holiday season before the big 2021 legislative session. Thanks for joining us today, Austin.
And thanks for having me, Scott.
You can see more of Austin's reporting on these and other topics at our website, nwpb.org. Thank you for joining us here in the unique Northwest.